choking on freezing rain and shattered glass. My final memory was Tristan's taillights fading into the storm as he rushed to save the woman who had stolen my life. Dying on that cold asphalt taught me one undeniable truth. Unconditional love is a toxic, fatal delusion. Now, staring at the perfectly manicured hands of my younger self, breathing in the scent of a lavish life I haven't yet ruined, a cold realization settles in. Second chances aren't for forgiveness. They are for absolute, calculated ruin. The shrill ringing of my iPhone pierced the dead silence of my bedroom, dragging me out of the abyss. My lungs expanded violently, gasping for air as if I were still drowning in the wreckage of my overturned Mercedes on Interstate 95. I clawed at my chest, expecting to feel the jagged tear of metal, the warm, sticky flow of my own life draining away. Nothing, only the soft, cool touch of La Perla silk against my skin. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the imported Brazilian hardwood floor of my Manhattan penthouse. My breathing was ragged as I stumbled toward the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Staring back at me was a ghost, or rather, a girl who hadn't yet been hollowed out by betrayal. My skin was flawless, my eyes a sharp, vibrant hazel, completely devoid of the dark, sunken circles that had defined the final months of my past life. My phone was still ringing on the nightstand. The caller ID flashed brightly. Tristan. A wave of nausea washed over me. Tristan Montgomery, the heir to Montgomery Holdings, the love of my life, my fiancé, and the man who had left me standing at the altar in front of 500 elite guests because his precious Savannah had threatened to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. Savannah Harper, the girl who had manipulated her way into New York high society by fabricating documents, claiming she was the illegitimate, sole heiress to the late oil tycoon Richard Belmont. In my past life, I had screamed the truth from the rooftops. I had hired private investigators, compiled dossiers, and tried to prove to Tristan that Savannah was nothing but a trailer park con artist from Ohio, draining his accounts and destroying our future. My desperate attempts to expose her only pushed Tristan further into her arms. He called me jealous. He called me unhinged. Savannah played the fragile, bullied billionaire's daughter perfectly, crying silent tears while wearing the designer clothes my family's investments had indirectly paid for. When I died in that car crash, chasing Tristan through a nor'easter to beg him to come back to the wedding, I died knowing Savannah had won. But as I stared at the flashing screen on my nightstand, the panic in my chest solidified into something entirely different. Ice-cold clarity. I picked up the phone. The date on the lock screen read October 14th, 2023. I sucked in a sharp breath. The Montgomery-Kensington merger gala. It was exactly 6 months before my doomed wedding day. Tonight was the night Tristan was supposed to officially announce our engagement to the press, cementing the union of our two massive family empires. In my previous life, tonight was also the night Savannah Harper made her debut in our social circle. She had shown up wearing a cheap replica of my custom Dior gown, accidentally spilled red wine on herself, and burst into tears, claiming I had glared at her so fiercely she panicked. Tristan had publicly scolded me, wrapping his tuxedo jacket around her trembling shoulders. That was the night the seed of his resentment toward me was planted. "Chloe, are you there?" Tristan's voice came through the speaker, laced with that familiar, entitled impatience. I closed my eyes. The sound of his voice didn't evoke love anymore. It sounded like the twisting of a knife. "I'm here, Tristan," I replied, my voice shockingly steady, dropping an octave into a calm, deadpan register. You didn't answer my first 3 calls. Look, I'm at the venue finalizing the catering. Don't be late tonight, all right? My father has the Forbes photographers circling. And, listen, a friend of mine is coming tonight. Savannah Belmont. She's new to the city, inherited a massive estate recently, and she's a bit overwhelmed by our world. Be nice to her, Chloe. I don't want any of your typical Kensington Ice Queen behavior. I let out a soft, dark laugh. The sound seemed to startle him. What's funny? He demanded. Nothing, Tristan. Don't worry. I'll be perfectly accommodating to your new friend. I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. I walked over to my walk-in closet and bypassed the garment bag holding the red custom Dior gown I had died for in my past life. I reached into the back and pulled out a razor-sharp, tailored emerald green Tom Ford pantsuit. If Tristan wanted to play savior to a fake heiress, I wasn't going to stand in his way. I was going to hand him the shovel and watch them both dig their own graves. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was bathed in the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers. New York's elite swirled across the marble floors, a sea of diamonds, whispered secrets, and clinking champagne flutes. When I arrived, the room instinctively parted for me. As the only daughter of Arthur and Beatrice Kensington, I was accustomed to the stares. But tonight, the whispers had a different tone. I wasn't wearing a sweeping, romantic gown meant to complement Tristan's tuxedo. The emerald Tom Ford suit clung to my frame like armor paired with diamond-studded stiletto heels, and my hair slicked back into a severe, elegant chignon. I looked less like a blushing bride-to-be and more like a corporate executioner. Across the room, standing near the ice sculpture, was Tristan. He was tall, impossibly handsome, with his dark hair and piercing blue eyes, the very features that had blinded me for 4 years. Beside him stood Savannah. Even from 50 feet away, the audacity of her presence made me smirk. She was wearing a red dress, a very obvious, poorly constructed knockoff of the Dior gown I was supposed to be wearing. In my past life, seeing her in my dress had triggered a meltdown. I had confronted her, demanding to know how she got the design, which gave her the perfect opening to play the victim. This time, I didn't even blink. I signaled a waiter, grabbed a flute of Dom Perignon, and leisurely strolled over to the golden couple. Tristan's eyes widened as I approached. He took in my suit, his jaw tightening in immediate disapproval. "Chloe, what are you wearing? The press is here. You look like you're going to a board meeting." "I dress for the business at hand, Tristan," I said smoothly, taking a sip of champagne. I turned my gaze to Savannah. She looked up at me through thick, false eyelashes, her lower lip already trembling in rehearsed anticipation of my fury. "You must be Savannah Belmont," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed condescension. "Tristan told me you were new to our circle. That dress is very brave." Savannah clutched Tristan's arm, her knuckles turning white. I hope you don't mind, Chloe. Tristan mentioned you were wearing red, and I just loved the color so much. I had my tailor rush this. I hope I didn't step on your toes." She was waiting for it. The explosion. She even subtly shifted her weight, holding a glass of Merlot perilously close to the bodice of her own dress, ready to spill it and blame my aggression. I smiled, a wide, razor-sharp smile. "Not at all, Savannah. Actually, red suits you perfectly. It's a very accessible look. Did you get it off the rack in the garment district?" Several socialites standing nearby stifled laughs. Savannah's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. She looked at Tristan, her eyes welling with tears. Tristan, I feel like she's mocking me. Tristan immediately stepped between us. His chest puffed out in ridiculous, misplaced chivalry. Chloe, stop it. I told you to be welcoming. Savannah is dealing with the loss of her father, Richard Belmont. She doesn't need your elitist attitude. I looked at Tristan, really looked at him. How had I ever been willing to die for this man? He was a fool, completely mesmerized by a cheap performance. You're absolutely right, Tristan, I said, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the nearby journalists and society matriarchs were listening. The ambient chatter of the room began to quiet down as heads turned in our direction. I apologize, Savannah, I continued, setting my champagne glass on a passing tray. I clearly don't understand the delicate intricacies of your situation. I unclasped the velvet clutch under my arm and reached inside. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the 8-carat flawless diamond engagement ring Tristan had given me in private 2 days ago. Tonight was supposed to be the public reveal. I pulled the ring out. The chandeliers caught the massive diamond, scattering fractured light across the hushed crowd. Tristan smiled, a smug, satisfied look crossing his face. He thought I was going to put it on and claim my territory. Instead, I reached out, took Savannah's trembling left hand, and dropped the multi-million-dollar ring directly into her palm. "What are you doing?" Tristan hissed, the color draining from his face. "I'm giving her what she clearly wants, Tristan," I said loudly, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the ballroom. "I'm breaking off our engagement." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Camera flashes erupted in a blinding strobe effect. "Chloe, have you lost your mind?" Tristan barked, stepping toward me, his hands raised in panic. "This isn't a joke. The merger, the Kensington-Montgomery merger, is hereby indefinitely suspended," I stated, my tone colder than absolute zero. I refuse to tie my family's legacy to a man who handles his personal affairs with such staggering incompetence. "You want to play house with a Belmont heiress?" I gestured to Savannah, who was staring at the massive diamond in her hand with unabashed, greedy hunger. "She's all yours, Tristan. Let's see how far her phantom trust fund takes you." I didn't wait for his rebuttal. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. The sea of people parted for me again. Not with judgment, but with sheer, unadulterated awe. My phone was already buzzing with frantic texts from my father, but I silenced it. Stepping out into the crisp autumn air of Manhattan, I hailed a black car. For the first time in 4 years, I could breathe. I wasn't just surviving. I was rewriting the script. The morning after the gala, the city was ablaze with scandal. The front page of the New York Post featured a massive photo of me dropping the ring into Savannah's hand, with the headline, "Kensington Heiress Drops Diamond and the Groom." I sat at the massive oak desk in my father's study, sipping black coffee. Arthur Kensington paced back and forth in front of the bay windows, rubbing his temples. "Chloe, I need to understand this," my father said, his voice a mixture of stern authority and paternal confusion. "You've loved Tristan since you were teenagers. We were set to merge our holding companies in 3 weeks. Pulling out now, it's going to cause a massive disruption in the market." "The market will recover, Dad," I replied calmly, setting my mug down on a leather coaster. "Montgomery Holdings is a sinking ship, and Tristan is drilling holes in the hull. Savannah Belmont is a fraud. Richard Belmont didn't have an illegitimate daughter. If you have your private investigators look into her, they'll find her real name, a trail of maxed-out credit cards, and a mother living in a trailer park outside Cleveland. My father stopped pacing. He stared at me, his sharp business instincts kicking in. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I'd bet my inheritance on it," I lied, effortlessly, relying on the agonizingly thorough research I had done in my past life. Tristan is currently funding her entire heiress lifestyle out of his personal accounts, which, as we both know, are deeply over-leveraged and backed by our seed money. My father's eyes hardened. Nobody liked being played, least of all Arthur Kensington. "I'll have my team run a full background check by noon." "Good. In the meantime, I need you to authorize the immediate withdrawal of the $50 million Kensington capital injection from Tristan's startup, Auratech." My father raised an eyebrow. "That will trigger a margin call. Auratech will face bankruptcy within the week if they can't find replacement capital. Then I suggest Tristan ask his new billionaire girlfriend for a loan." I smiled. A chilling expression that made even my ruthless corporate father pause. Once my father left the study to deploy his attack dogs, I opened my laptop. I navigated away from the stock tickers and typed in a URL I had forced myself to forget in my previous life. Harvard Business School admissions portal. In my past life, I had received my acceptance letter to HBS's prestigious MBA program the same week Tristan proposed. He had begged me not to go to Boston, claiming a long-distance relationship would put too much strain on his mental health. Like an obedient, love-blind idiot, I had declined my seat to stay in New York and help him build Auratech, a company he later used to fund Savannah's lavish wardrobe. I logged in. My acceptance was still valid, pending my final confirmation and deposit. I clicked accept. A profound sense of vindication washed over me. I immediately drafted an email to Professor Harrison, a renowned economics strategist at HBS who had personally scouted me during my undergrad at Columbia. I informed him I was officially enrolling for the spring term and requested a meeting to discuss a fellowship. At 2:01 p.m., the storm finally hit. The heavy mahogany doors of my father's country club suite burst open. Tristan stood there, his face flushed with rage. His tuxedo, from the night before, replaced by a rumpled designer suit. Savannah trailed closely behind him, clutching a Chanel bag that I instantly recognized as one of mine. He must have taken it from our shared apartment before I moved my things out at dawn. "What the hell are you doing, Chloe?" Tristan shouted, storming past the startled concierge. "My CFO just called me in a panic. Kensington Capital just pulled out of Auratech. They froze all our credit lines." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs elegantly. "Hello, Tristan. Savannah. Nice bag." Savannah quickly hid the bag behind her back, looking down at the carpet. "Don't change the subject." Tristan slammed his hands down on my desk. "You're doing this to punish me because you're jealous. You embarrassed me at the gala, and now you're trying to ruin my company just because I showed a little compassion to Savannah." "I'm not punishing you, Tristan. I'm restructuring my portfolio," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Auratech is a high-risk venture. As a primary investor, I lost faith in the CEO's judgment. It's purely business. "Business?" Tristan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "You're tearing down everything we built. We need that $50 million by Friday, or the banks will seize the servers." I looked past him to Savannah, who was trying very hard to look like she belonged in a room where millions of dollars were being casually discussed. "Well, it's a good thing you have the Belmont heiress by your side," I said, a dangerous smirk playing on my lips. "Savannah, Didn't you just inherit a massive liquid trust? Surely 50 million is pocket change for the Belmont estate. Why don't you write Tristan a check to save his company? Tristan turned to Savannah, his eyes lighting up with desperate hope. Savannah, baby, I didn't want to ask, but could you? Just a bridge loan until the end of the quarter. I'll pay you back with interest. Savannah froze. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the harsh office lights. I can't, Tristan. My funds are tied up in probate. The lawyer said I can't touch a single cent for at least a year. I laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. Probate? That's funny. My father's attorneys spoke with the Belmont estate executors this morning. Richard Belmont's assets were liquidated and distributed to his charities 6 months ago. There is no probate, and there is no secret daughter. Tristan whipped his head back to me. What are you talking about? She's a fraud, Tristan, I said, standing up and leaning over the desk, my eyes locking onto his. She's not an heiress. She's a parasite. And congratulations, you threw away a diamond to pick up a rock. Tristan looked at Savannah, searching her face for a denial. Savannah stepped back, tears welling in her eyes, her lips trembling as she prepared to launch into her trademark victim routine. Tristan, she's lying. Chloe is just trying to tear us apart, Savannah cried out. But I was already walking toward the door, my coat draped over my arm. I had a flight to Boston to catch and a future to build. As I stepped out of the office, leaving Tristan trapped in a cage of his own making, I knew this was only the beginning of his regret. And I was going to make sure he felt every agonizing second of it. Cambridge, Massachusetts, smelled like old money, aged parchment, and crisp autumn leaves. As I stepped out of my town car and onto the historic cobblestones of the Harvard Business School campus, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders, the suffocating, toxic air of New York society, and the ghost of the desperate, lovesick girl I used to be was finally behind me. In my past life, I had sacrificed this exact moment for a man who ultimately left me bleeding on a highway. I had traded my ambition for his fragile ego. But standing here now, clutching my leather briefcase, I breathed in the sharp New England air and promised myself one thing. I would never shrink to fit into someone else's world ever again. I was here to build my own empire. Professor Harrison's seminar on advanced venture capital and private equity was notoriously ruthless. He only accepted 20 students, and the room was a shark tank of legacy heirs, tech prodigies, and ruthless prodigals. Taking my seat in the second row, I immediately sensed eyes on me. The Kensington name carried weight, but the recent, highly publicized dissolution of my engagement had made me a walking scandal. I didn't care. Let them stare. Miss Kensington. A smooth, baritone voice murmured from the seat next to mine. I turned to find a man with striking, silver-gray eyes and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from marble. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that screamed Savile Row. But his posture was relaxed, almost predatory. Dominic Pierce, he introduced himself, extending a hand. The Pierce family owned half the commercial real estate in London, but Dominic had made a name for himself as a ruthless corporate raider on Wall Street before deciding to get his MBA just for the networking. Chloe, I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, assessing. I read about your restructuring in the journal, Dominic said, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. Pulling 50 million out of Oratech overnight. A bloodbath. The Montgomerys are scrambling to keep the lights on. Was it a strategic pivot? Or just a very expensive breakup? I met his gaze. My expression, completely unreadable. I don't let sentimentality dictate my portfolio, Mr. Pierce. Oratech had a bloated valuation and a CEO who was distracted by shiny, worthless objects. I merely cut my losses. Dominic let out a low, appreciative chuckle. Remind me never to end up on the wrong side of your ledger, Chloe. Over the next few months, Dominic and I became an inseparable force. We were intellectual equals, partnering on hostile takeover simulations and dismantling case studies with a surgical precision that left even Professor Harrison speechless. Dominic respected my ruthlessness, and I appreciated his lack of pity. There was no romance between us, only the intoxicating thrill of mutual ambition and shared power. Meanwhile, my father kept me updated on the slow, agonizing death of Tristan's empire back in New York. Without the Kensington capital, Oratech went into freefall. Tristan, too arrogant to admit his mistake and crawl back to my father, had desperately tried to secure bridge loans from secondary-tier banks. But the financial world is small, and the scent of blood was in the water. Nobody wanted to catch a falling knife. He's liquidating his personal assets, Chloe, my father told me over the phone one evening in late November, the satisfaction evident in his voice. He sold the Hamptons estate, the yacht, and he's heavily leveraged his shares in Montgomery Holdings just to make payroll for his developers. And the Belmont heiress? I asked, sipping a glass of Macallan 18 while staring out my bay window at the snow falling over the Charles River. Still stringing him along, my father chuckled darkly. She produced some forged document from a Swiss trustee, claiming her funds are frozen by the SEC pending an audit of her late father's offshore accounts. Tristan bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He actually hired a legal team to fight the embargo. It's pathetic. I smiled into my glass. Tristan was a man entirely ruled by his pride. Admitting Savannah was a fraud would mean admitting I was right. It would mean facing the reality that he had thrown away a multi-billion-dollar alliance and a woman who genuinely loved him for a trailer park con artist. His ego simply couldn't process it. He was choosing to ride the sinking ship straight to the bottom of the ocean rather than jump. But Savannah was getting sloppy. The pressure of maintaining the heiress facade without Tristan's bottomless credit cards was cracking her. She was spotted pawning jewelry Tristan had bought her, claiming to the tabloids she was donating the proceeds to charity. The final nail in the coffin was approaching. April was looming, the month I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Only this time, Tristan had decided to replace the bride. The heavy cream envelope arrived at my Cambridge townhouse in mid-March. The calligraphy was elegant, but the paper stock was cheap. A far cry from the triple-thick, gold-embossed invitations I had commissioned for our wedding in my past life. Tristan Arthur Montgomery and Savannah Rose Belmont request the honor of your presence. I traced my finger over the raised lettering, a cold, dark amusement bubbling in my chest. Tristan was marrying her. It was a desperate, Hail Mary play. Savannah had likely convinced him that a legal union would allow him to bypass the probate restrictions and access her phantom billions as her husband. And Tristan, drowning in debt and facing the imminent bankruptcy of Oratech, was foolish enough to believe it. Tucked inside the envelope was a handwritten note on lined notebook paper. Chloe, I know things ended badly, but Tristan and I want to extend an olive branch. It would mean the world to us if you came to witness our special day. No hard feelings, Savannah. It was a blatant taunt. Savannah thought she had won. She thought she had secured the Montgomery fortune and the society crown, and she wanted to rub my nose in it. She didn't realize she was marrying a man who was quietly hemorrhaging cash, tying herself to a sinking stone. "Are you actually going to attend this circus?" Dominic asked, leaning against the doorframe of my study, glancing at the invitation. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, tossing the invitation onto my desk. "But I'm not going just to watch. I'm going to deliver a wedding gift." "Do tell." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward Dominic. It displayed a drafted contract from Kensington Holdings. Oratech's primary lender, a boutique bank in Manhattan, is panicking. Tristan has missed 2 consecutive interest payments. I've just authorized Kensington Capital to purchase Oratech's debt at a premium. Dominic's eyes widened, a slow, wicked smile spreading across his face. "You bought his debt. You're his sole creditor." "Exactly," I purred. "If he defaults, I have the legal right to seize all of his remaining assets, including his controlling shares in Montgomery Holdings. I own him, Dominic, and I'm going to foreclose on his life on his wedding day." Dominic adjusted his cuffs, his silver eyes gleaming with predatory delight. "Well, in that case, you're going to need a +1. I hear New York in April is lovely for hostile takeovers." The wedding was held at a second-tier country club in Long Island. The plaza had supposedly lost their reservation, but anyone with half a brain knew the Montgomerys simply couldn't afford the plaza's minimums anymore. When Dominic and I arrived, the reception was already in full swing. The whispers started the second I stepped into the ballroom. I wasn't wearing a polite pastel or a demure gown. I was wearing a custom, midnight black Alexander McQueen dress with a plunging neckline and a thigh-high slit. It was a dress meant for a funeral, which was entirely appropriate, given what I was about to do. Dominic stood beside me, exuding a terrifying, aristocratic aura that made the lesser guests part like the Red Sea. Tristan was standing by the bar, looking exhausted. The tailored tuxedo couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the prominent hollows of his cheeks. He looked like a man standing in front of a firing squad, waiting for the command. Then he saw me. The champagne flute in his hand slipped, shattering against the parquet floor. He stared at me, his breath hitching, a tidal wave of conflicting emotions washing over his face. Shock, longing, and a profound, desperate realization of what he had lost. I looked untouchable. I looked like a queen who had survived an assassination attempt and returned to burn the kingdom to the ground. Beside him, Savannah turned. She was wearing a violently ostentatious white gown, dripping in cubic zirconia that she was undoubtedly passing off as diamonds. Her smug smile faltered the moment she saw Dominic holding my waist. I glided across the room, the crowd falling dead silent. The string quartet in the corner nervously stopped playing. "Chloe," Tristan choked out, stepping forward, ignoring his new bride. "You came." "I told you I dress for the business at hand, Tristan," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "And I have some very important business with the groom." I snapped my fingers. Dominic smoothly reached into his tailored jacket and produced a thick, leather-bound folder. He handed it to me. "What is this?" Savannah demanded, her voice shrill, stepping in front of Tristan like a territorial chihuahua. "If you're here to make a scene, Chloe, you can leave. Tristan is my husband now. We don't need your toxic energy." I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Tristan, who was staring at the folder as if it were a ticking bomb. "This," I said, handing the folder to Tristan, "is a formal notice of default. Yesterday at 4 p.m., Kensington Capital acquired the entirety of Oratech's outstanding debt. As of midnight, you missed your final grace period payment." Tristan's hands shook as he opened the folder. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. "Chloe, no, you bought my debt?" "I did," I smiled, a predator baring its teeth. "And per the covenants of the loan agreement, I am officially executing my right to seize your collateral. Oratech is mine, your penthouse is mine, and your 20% stake in Montgomery Holdings, mine." "You can't do this," Tristan shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "My father will—" "Your father can't save you, Tristan." I cut him off, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "His liquidity is tied up in the merger you destroyed. You are officially bankrupt." "Do something, Savannah." Tristan whirled around to his new wife, sheer terror in his eyes. "Call your trustee. Tell them it's an emergency. We need the Belmont money transferred right now, or I lose everything." Savannah stepped back, her face contorted in panic. I can't, Tristan. I told you. The SEC. There is no SEC investigation, Savannah," I interrupted, my voice ringing out for the entire room of elite gossips to hear. I signaled to the entrance. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. Walking in was not a process server, but a woman in her late 50s, wearing a cheap, floral polyester dress and clutching a knockoff Coach bag. She looked terrified, overwhelmed by the wealth in the room. Savannah let out a choked gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. "Tristan," I said, gesturing to the bewildered woman, "allow me to introduce you to your new mother-in-law, Brenda Harper, from a very lovely trailer park just outside of Cleveland." The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. The socialites, who had spent the last 6 months pretending to tolerate the Belmont heiress, were now visibly salivating at the absolute destruction unfolding before them. "Savvy, what is all this?" Brenda Harper asked, her Midwestern accent cutting through the tense air like a rusty saw. "You told me you got an acting job in New York. You said you were playing a rich girl on a TV show. Why did this nice lady's lawyers fly me out here on a private jet?" Tristan stared at the woman, then slowly turned his head to look at Savannah. The realization hit him with the physical force of a freight train. The probate delays, the missing millions, the cheap, knockoff dresses passed off as couture, the desperate push to get married today. It all locked into place, a puzzle depicting his absolute ruin. "Savannah," Tristan's voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual arrogant bravado. Is she your mother?" Savannah burst into tears, dropping the victim act and switching to pure, animalistic survival. "Tristan, please, I love you. I just wanted to be a part of your world. I knew if I told you the truth, you'd never look at me. You lied to me," Tristan whispered, stumbling backward as if she had physically struck him. "You let me bleed my company dry. You let me throw away Chloe. You let me bankrupt my family. For a lie." "I'm your wife now," Savannah shrieked, grabbing his lapels. "For richer or poorer, Tristan, you have to protect me." Tristan forcefully shoved her away, looking at her with an expression of such profound disgust, it made my blood run cold. He looked up at me. The man who had been my entire world in my past life was completely broken, standing in the ruins of a life he had demolished with his own 2 hands. Chloe, he choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. Chloe, please. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. Please, don't do this. Don't take the company. It's all I have left. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just an overwhelming sense of closure. The ghost of the girl who died in that car crash was finally laid to rest. You did this to yourself, Tristan, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle in its absolute finality. Enjoy your marriage. I hear Ohio is lovely this time of year. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom, Dominic placing a protective, possessive hand on the small of my back. The sounds of Savannah's hysterical sobbing and Tristan's screaming followed us out, a beautiful, tragic symphony that I would never have to listen to again. 2 weeks later, the rain was coming down in sheets across Cambridge. It was the kind of freezing, relentless downpour that reminded me of the night I died. I was sitting in the library of my townhouse, reviewing term sheets for a new biotech startup I was acquiring, when the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the hallway. My housekeeper, Maria, opened the door. I heard a muffled, desperate voice. A moment later, Tristan pushed past her, standing in the entrance of my library. He was completely unrecognizable. He wasn't wearing a designer suit. He wore a soaked, cheap windbreaker. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was trembling violently from the cold. The Montgomery air reduced to a beggar in the rain. Tristan, I said, not bothering to stand up. You're dripping on my Persian rug. I annulled it, he blurted out, his teeth chattering as he took a step forward. I filed the papers the morning after the wedding. Fraud. My father's lawyers pushed it through. She's gone, Chloe. Savannah is gone. They're investigating her for wire fraud. Congratulations, I replied coolly, turning back to my laptop. Though I'm not sure why you traveled all the way to Massachusetts to tell me this. You could have sent an email. Because I need you, he cried out, falling to his knees right there on the imported wool. The sheer, pathetic nature of the gesture made me recoil. Chloe, I lost everything. The bank took the penthouse. My father ousted me from the board. Oratech is yours. I have nothing, but I realized none of it matters. I only want you. I was a blind, stupid fool. I love you. I've always loved you. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with that familiar, desperate pleading that had worked on me 1,000 times in my past life. He expected me to melt. He expected the girl who had worshipped him to reach down, pull him up, and fix his broken life. I closed my laptop with a soft click. I stood up, walking slowly around the oak desk. I looked down at him, my expression a mask of absolute, terrifying apathy. You don't love me, Tristan, I said softly, the silence of the room amplifying my words. You love what I could do for you. You love the safety net of my family's money, the prestige of my name, and the unconditional forgiveness I used to offer you. You don't want a partner. You want a savior. No, that's not true, he sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my silk trousers. I stepped back, out of his reach. Do you know what the worst part is, Tristan? In another lifetime, I would have died for you. I did die for you. He blinked, confused by the phrasing, his mind unable to grasp the literal truth of my words. Chloe, please, give me one more chance. We can start over. I'll do anything. I don't give second chances, I said, crossing my arms. I learn from my mistakes. And you, Tristan, were the biggest mistake of my life. I own your company. I own your legacy. And as of this moment, I am completely, entirely done with you. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Maria, please call campus security. There is a trespasser in my home. Chloe, no, please, Tristan screamed, scrambling to his feet as I turned my back on him. You can't do this. We belong together. Chloe. I didn't turn around. I walked toward the spiral staircase, ascending to the second floor without a single backward glance. I listened as security arrived, dragging a kicking, sobbing Tristan out into the freezing rain. The front door slammed shut. The house was silent again. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the street. Tristan was on his knees on the wet pavement, staring up at my window, the rain washing away the last remnants of his dignity. I pulled the velvet curtains closed, shutting him out in the cold. He was finally experiencing the exact, agonizing regret I had felt in my final moments. But unlike me, he wasn't going to get a second chance. He was going to have to live with it. In my life, it was just beginning. The months following Tristan's pathetic display on my front step were a masterclass in corporate resurrection. I didn't just take over Oratech. I gutted it, sanitized it, and rebuilt it from the ground up. The bloated, flashy consumer app that Tristan had envisioned was scrapped. Instead, utilizing the brightest minds I recruited directly out of MIT and Harvard, I pivoted the company into high-frequency trading cybersecurity. I rebranded it as Aegis Innovations. Within 8 months, Aegis secured government contracts that Tristan couldn't have landed in 3 lifetimes. Dominic Pierce and I became the undisputed titans of the Harvard Business School class of 2024. Our alliance had evolved from academic sparring to a lethal corporate partnership. He handled the aggressive European acquisitions for his family's real estate portfolio, and I fortified the Kensington Empire's tech sector. We operated with a synchronized ruthlessness that terrified our professors and commanded the absolute respect of our peers. There was no messy, suffocating romance between us. There were no manipulative mind games or desperate pleas for validation. When Dominic looked at me, he didn't see a fragile heiress to be protected or exploited. He saw an equal. He saw a queen. And when he finally kissed me, late one night in the HBS Baker Library, after closing a $2 billion merger, it wasn't a desperate grasp for control. It was a sealing of a pact. Meanwhile, Tristan's descent into the abyss was accelerating. Cut off from the Montgomery wealth and blacklisted by every reputable investment bank on Wall Street, Tristan became a pariah. But pride is a venomous thing, and a desperate man with a shattered ego is capable of breathtaking stupidity. I received the intel on a brisk Tuesday morning in late January. I was sitting in the corner booth of a private dining club in Back Bay, slicing into a perfectly seared filet mignon, when my lead cybersecurity architect at Aegis called me. Ms. Kensington, we've detected an anomaly in the legacy servers, David reported, his voice tight with urgency. Someone used a backdoor protocol to access the original Oratech source code. It was an old administrative credential, Tristan Montgomery's. I paused, my silver steak knife hovering over the china plate. Tristan copied the code after I legally seized the intellectual property? Yes, ma'am. He downloaded the entire framework 3 days before the default notice was officially served. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Dominic, sitting across from me in a bespoke charcoal suit, raised an eyebrow in silent inquiry. It seems my ex-fiancé has graduated from financial incompetence to federal corporate espionage, I murmured, muting the phone for a second. I unmuted. Trace the IP, David. Where did he take it? That's the concerning part, Chloe. He didn't just keep it on a hard drive. Our dark web monitors flagged snippets of our proprietary algorithm being shopped around to private venture capital firms. He's trying to sell the stolen code to fund a rival startup. Let him, I said smoothly. David stammered. Excuse me, Ms. Kensington, if he sells that architecture, it could compromise our upcoming launch at the World Economic Forum. He won't sell it to just anyone, David. Tristan is a snob. He wants a whale. He wants someone who hates my family enough to fund his petty revenge. My mind raced, slotting the pieces together with terrifying clarity. Monitor the code. Leave the back door open, but sandbox it. I want to know exactly who he climbs into bed with. It didn't take long to find out. 2 weeks later, my father's private investigators sent me a dossier filled with high-resolution photographs taken outside a private club in Manhattan. There was Tristan, looking haggard but manic, shaking hands with Alistair Rothschild. Alistair was an old-money vulture capitalist who had harbored a bitter vendetta against the Kensingtons ever since my father aggressively outbid him for a lithium mine in Nevada a decade ago. If Tristan was selling stolen Kensington property, Alistair was exactly the kind of arrogant predator who would buy it just to spite us. But Tristan wasn't the only one making desperate moves. Savannah Harper's life had become a spectacular tabloid tragedy. The Department of Justice had frozen what little assets she had left, investigating her for a massive wire fraud scheme. She was facing 20 years in federal prison for defrauding banks using forged Belmont estate documents. In my past life, Savannah had always been the mastermind, staying one step ahead of the consequences while I took the fall. But without my death to distract the world, and without Tristan's money to shield her, she was nothing but a cornered rat. And rats, when trapped, will chew off their own limbs to survive. Or in this case, chew on whoever is closest. On a rainy Thursday, my attorney in New York forwarded me a sealed transcript from the Southern District of New York. Savannah had taken a plea deal to save her own skin and reduce her sentence to a minimum security facility. Savannah had completely flipped on Tristan. She told the federal prosecutors that the entire fake heiress scam had been Tristan's idea. She claimed Tristan knew she was broke all along, and that he had orchestrated the forgery of the Belmont documents to artificially inflate Auratech's valuation and defraud my family's holding company out of the initial $50 million investment. It was a masterstroke of pathological lying. She was framing him for the very fraud she had perpetrated against him. And because Tristan had just been caught stealing proprietary code to sell to Alistair Rothschild, the FBI was more than ready to believe he was a criminal mastermind rather than a gullible victim. The board was set. Tristan thought he was planning an ambush. He didn't realize he was already standing on the gallows, and I was holding the lever. The World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, was a gathering of the most powerful people on the planet. The crisp, thin alpine air buzzed with the weight of global commerce. Billionaires, heads of state, and tech oligarchs rubbed shoulders in the heavily guarded halls of the Congress Center. This was where I chose to formally unveil Aegis Innovations to the world. Dominic and I stood in the VIP green room overlooking the snow-covered promenade. I wore a striking tailored white wool suit by Ralph Lauren, a stark contrast to the black morning dress I had worn to Tristan's wedding. Today wasn't about death. It was about ascension. "The trap is primed," Dominic said, adjusting his Patek Philippe watch. He handed me an encrypted tablet. Alistair Rothschild is seated in the third row of the main auditorium. And look who he brought as his technical advisor. I glanced at the screen, viewing the live feed from the auditorium's security cameras. Tristan Montgomery was sitting next to Alistair, wearing a suit that was a season too old and sweating profusely despite the climate control. He held a sleek silver laptop on his knees. "He's going to try to hijack the presentation," I said, a predatory thrill coursing through my veins. According to David's monitoring, Tristan and Alistair had modified the stolen Auratech code. They planned to execute a cyber intrusion during my live demonstration, crashing the Aegis system in front of the world's elite to prove our cybersecurity was a sham. Then, Alistair would swoop in and offer his superior platform, built on the stolen architecture, ruining my reputation and securing Tristan the revenge and wealth he so desperately craved. "Are you ready to end him?" Dominic asked, his silver eyes locking onto mine with absolute, unwavering support. "I ended him a year ago," I replied, handing the tablet back. "Today, I'm just burying the corpse." The applause was deafening as I walked onto the main stage. The massive LED screens behind me displayed the sleek, minimalist logo of Aegis Innovations. Looking out into the sea of power brokers, I easily spotted Tristan's pale, desperate face in the third row. He looked like a man about to pull the pin on a grenade. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice echoing through the cavernous hall with absolute authority. "For the last decade, financial cybersecurity has been reactive. We wait for the breach, and then we patch the leak. Aegis Innovations changes that paradigm. Our AI-driven architecture doesn't just block intrusions. It anticipates them, traps the malicious actors, and exposes them in real time." I saw Tristan's fingers flying across his keyboard. He was executing the backdoor script. He thought he was exploiting a weakness in my code. He didn't know the backdoor was a honeypot, a digital cage specifically designed by my team to absorb his attack, reverse trace it, and project the attacker's data. "To demonstrate," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, my eyes locked directly on Tristan. "We have deliberately left a legacy vulnerability in our public-facing firewall, a honeypot, and it appears someone in this very room is attempting to exploit it right now." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. I raised a sleek remote and clicked it. The massive screens behind me shifted from the Aegis logo to a stark, red tracing map. Code cascaded down the screen, followed instantly by an IP address, a MAC address, and a localized physical location. The dot on the map zoomed in on the Congress Center. It zoomed in on the main auditorium. It zoomed in on row 3, seat 14. The spotlight operator, tipped off by my security team minutes prior, instantly swung a blinding 10,000-watt beam directly onto Tristan Montgomery. The entire audience of global leaders, CEOs, and journalists gasped, physically recoiling from Tristan and Alistair, as if they were infected with the plague. Tristan froze, his hands hovering over his laptop. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost trapped in the headlights of an oncoming train. "What you are witnessing on the screen," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a surgical scalpel, "is a live, felony-level corporate cyber attack. The data being broadcast confirms that the attacker is using stolen, proprietary code from my holding company to attempt to sabotage a multinational financial infrastructure." Alistair Rothschild jumped out of his seat, his face purple with rage and panic. He realized instantly that he had been played, that Tristan had led him straight into a federal trap. "I have nothing to do with this," Alistair bellowed, scrambling away from Tristan. "He's a contractor. I didn't authorize this." "No, wait," Tristan shouted, his voice cracking hysterically as he looked from Alistair to the stage. "Chloe, you set me up. This is a setup." "The only thing I set, Tristan, was an alarm," I replied coldly. "You chose to break in." The heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium slammed open. 4 officers from the Swiss Federal Police, accompanied by an agent from Interpol, marched down the aisle. The Swiss banking regulators and the SEC commissioners, seated in the front rows, watched in grim satisfaction. There is nothing the global elite hate more than a thief who makes them look vulnerable. "Tristan Montgomery," the lead Interpol agent announced, his voice booming over the chaos. "You are under arrest for international corporate espionage, cyber-terrorism, and violation of the Swiss Data Protection Act. Stand up and step away from the device." "No, you don't understand. She stole my company first," Tristan screamed, thrashing wildly as 2 officers grabbed his arms, dragging him out of his seat. His laptop crashed to the floor, the screen shattering. "Chloe, tell them it was my code." I stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at him from my pedestal of absolute victory. "Your code, Tristan, went bankrupt," I said softly, though the microphone picked it up perfectly, broadcasting his ultimate humiliation to the world. "Take him away." As Tristan was dragged up the aisle in handcuffs, sobbing and screaming my name, the audience erupted into a standing ovation. They weren't clapping for his downfall. They were clapping for my absolute, terrifying display of power. I had turned an attempted assassination into the greatest marketing stunt in corporate history. Dominic walked out onto the stage, standing beside me. He didn't smile, but the pride radiating from him was palpable. He took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine, presenting a united front of untouchable dominance. Tristan's screams faded into the alpine wind outside, silenced by the heavy oak doors. He was gone. The parasite had finally been exterminated. The fallout from Davos was a spectacle that kept the financial media gorged for months. Tristan's extradition to the United States was swift and brutal, with Savannah's perjury claiming he was the mastermind behind the fake heiress fraud, and the undeniable digital proof of his cyber attack in Switzerland. The federal prosecutors didn't even offer him a plea deal. He was a trophy kill for the Department of Justice. During the trial in the Southern District of New York, I was subpoenaed as a character witness. I walked into the courtroom wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal Dior suit, the designer I was meant to wear on the night my life changed forever. Tristan sat at the defense table in a faded orange jumpsuit. The man who had once commanded ballrooms and broken my heart was entirely hollowed out. His hair was thinning, his posture was hunched, and his eyes held the vacant, traumatized stare of a man who realized he had single-handedly orchestrated his own annihilation. When the prosecutor asked me to describe Tristan's character, I didn't yell. I didn't call him a monster. I just looked at him with profound, chilling indifference. Mr. Montgomery is a man who possessed every advantage the world could offer, I testified, my voice echoing in the silent courtroom. He possessed wealth, loyalty, and a future built on solid foundations, but he lacked the integrity to appreciate it and the intelligence to maintain it. He is not a mastermind. He is merely a tragic liability. That indifference hurt him more than any screaming match ever could. As I stepped down from the stand, I saw a single tear slide down his cheek. He finally understood that I didn't hate him anymore. I simply felt nothing for him at all. He was a ghost from a past life that no longer held any power over me. Tristan Montgomery was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Savannah Harper didn't fare much better. Despite her cooperation, the judge was disgusted by her flagrant manipulation of the legal system. She was sentenced to 5 years at a minimum security facility in Danbury, Connecticut. The Belmont heiress now spent her days scrubbing industrial laundry machines, her dreams of high society buried under piles of prison-issue linens. 2 weeks after Tristan's sentencing, the heavy Boston humidity broke, giving way to a brilliant, sun-drenched spring morning. It was graduation day at Harvard Business School. I stood on the manicured lawn of Harvard Yard, wearing my crimson robes. My father, Arthur Kensington, stood beside me, beaming with a pride that transcended mere business success. He saw the woman I had become, a titan in my own right, no longer an accessory to a Montgomery, but the sole architect of the Kensington legacy. "You did it, Chloe," my father said, adjusting the tassel on my cap. "Aegis Innovations is valued at $3 billion, and you're graduating at the top of your class. You've secured our family's future for the next century." "We secured it, Dad," I corrected him with a warm smile. From the crowd of celebrating graduates, Dominic Pierce approached. He looked devastatingly handsome in his own robes, the silver of his eyes catching the New England sunlight. He shook my father's hand firmly. "Arthur," Dominic said respectfully, "if you'll excuse us, I need a moment with your daughter." My father smiled knowingly and stepped away to mingle with the other billionaire parents. Dominic led me away from the chaos, toward the quiet shade of a massive, centuries-old oak tree near the library. He turned to face me, his expression dropping the predatory corporate mask he wore for the rest of the world. "The Pierce Real Estate Board approved the merger this morning," Dominic said softly. "Aegis security protocols will be integrated into every commercial skyscraper we own across Europe and Asia. We are officially a monopoly, Chloe." "I told you we would be," I replied, a rush of triumph warming my chest. Dominic reached into the pocket of his trousers. He didn't pull out a velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee in a pathetic display of submission. Instead, he pulled out a custom-forged platinum signet ring, engraved with the intertwined crests of the Kensington and Pierce families. He took my left hand, the same hand that Tristan had once burdened with a diamond of toxic obligation, and slipped the platinum band onto my index finger. A ring of power, a ring of equal partnership. "I'm not asking you to marry me to merge our bank accounts, Chloe," Dominic said, his voice a low, magnetic rumble. "I'm asking you to rule with me, because God knows, this world isn't ready for either of us alone." I looked down at the heavy platinum ring, then up into Dominic's eyes. There was no fear in my heart. There was no desperate, clinging anxiety. There was only the thrilling, boundless horizon of total control. "Let them burn, Dominic," I smiled, stepping into his arms. "We'll build our castles on their ashes." As we walked back into the sunlight, the cheers of the graduating class washing over us, I finally allowed myself to look back at the girl I used to be, the girl who died, choking on freezing rain and shattered glass, weeping for a man who didn't deserve her shadow. I left her buried on that highway. I let Tristan Montgomery marry his fake heiress, and in doing so, I handed him the match to immolate his own life. Second chances aren't about finding forgiveness. They are about finding your teeth, and I had finally taken a bite out of the world. What a journey From dying in the cold rain for a man who betrayed her, to standing at the absolute pinnacle of global power, Chloe proved that the best revenge isn't just moving on, it's taking over the world. Tristan lost everything to a fake heiress, and Savannah's lies landed her behind bars, proving that karma never misses a deadline. Did Chloe's savage corporate takedown at Davos leave you breathless? If you love this story of ultimate rebirth, betrayal, and absolute power, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life revenge stories. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done with the stolen code?